Today, we're going to talk with, frankly, a hero. My friend Collin May, and senior fellow at Frontier, has gone through an extraordinary story that we can all learn from. And today, we're going to talk about his story and how it gives hope for all of us, but also a warning to each of you.
In 2022, Canadian lawyer Collin May was fired from the Government of Alberta for a reason that may shock you. His dismissal from the province's Human Rights Commission wasn't due to misconduct, but over a 13-year-old book review he wrote, critiquing an historical analysis of Islam. Critics, ranging from academics and activists to the provincial NDP's justice critic, branded it racist, sparking a relentless cancellation campaign. As the public attacks escalated, Collin's mental health, career, and finances suffered. But instead of giving up, he fought back, speaking out to expose the toxic mechanics of cancel culture. His writing explains how cancel culture follows a predictable, psychology-driven pattern, with trusted institutions often siding with cancelers and legitimizing their accusations, regardless of merit. Worst of all, he cites research that shows these attacks aren't driven by justice. They're simply a way for cancelers to boost their social status.
Wow, that was quite a summation of your story, Collin. And, it sounds like a very difficult one. And I'm so glad that you could join us. I know that you're not only a senior fellow with Frontier, but you're also a lawyer. You're an adjunct lecturer in community health services at the University of Calgary. And you studied both at Dalhousie, Harvard, and, of course, in Paris as well. So a warm welcome to you, Collin.
Thanks, David, for having me.
Colin, that was a very powerful clip about your story, and it sounds like an incredible journey. And I can't imagine what you've gone through, but can you clarify in our own minds what you were doing in terms of joining the Alberta Human Rights Commission and kind of how this story unfolded from your perspective?
Okay, sure. Well, I got involved with the Alberta Human Rights Commission initially in 2019. The UCP government appointed me as a part-time commissioner. And that meant I would write decisions, run hearings, all that sort of thing. So sort of, it's a tribunal, so you're like a judge, effectively. Very similar responsibilities. And I had, previous to becoming a commissioner, I had been involved with healthcare reform and professional regulatory reform, because my family had been harmed by a professional regulator who wrongfully decided to investigate my sister, who is a registered nurse, when my father passed away. It was based upon misinformation they'd received, but they went ahead and did that. So I got quite involved with professional regulation, some healthcare reform, health equity, working especially for Indigenous and elderly Albertans. And because of that, I became involved with the reform of professional regulators, and they run hearings. So they're a tribunal and based on a complaints process. Well, the Human Rights Commission is very similar. It's a tribunal based upon a complaints process. So I have quite a bit of experience with that. Plus, just intellectually, I'd studied a lot of the foundations of human rights and Hobbes and Locke and things like that. So I seemed to be fairly well suited. And at the time, it was Doug Schweitzer, who was the Minister of Justice here in Jason Kenney's government. He appointed me. And 3 years later, the chief at the time, who had been appointed under the Notley government, he left. He left early in his contract, went to Ottawa, had a bit of a run in there, but I won't get into that. He did. But so I applied for the job, and I was appointed in May of 2022, May 25th to be exact. And then the Justice Minister at the time, Tyler Shandro, phoned me up, told me, "Yep, you've got the job. Cabinet just approved you." But that was when the problem started, because in the same call, he told me that legal counsel at the Human Rights Commission was going to seek to undermine me. And I didn't know what that meant.
So just to clarify, so the Minister of Justice appoints you to be the chair
Mhm.
of the Alberta Human Rights Commission. So this is a very significant appointment. And You must have been elated. You must have been delighted by the news.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, I was very interested. I mean, these commissions tend to lean to the left. I don't lean to the left. I could just sort of consider myself kind of a centrist, really. But
Mhm,
I thought there was a lot that I could do there.
mhm.
Having been a commissioner for 3 years, I saw some of the issues, so I thought I would address them. And so I was quite excited. I was sort of thrilled to be doing this. And I had received a lot of encouragement from people in the UCP to
Very
go
good.
ahead and make and apply for the job. So I had the sense that I had a lot of backing from them. So yeah, I
So
was quite happy.
within and so Colin, within 3 months, it started to kind of unfold. What happened?
Yes. Well, initially there was, and I didn't know about this right away, but there wasn't much complaint about me on the day I was appointed or the cabinet voted me in. And then I didn't start officially until July 14th. So I had about a month and a half there in between. But what really got going um, was July 4th. I get an email from John Whitaker, who is works in the premier's office, telling me, "Oh, there's a journalist snooping around about a book review you wrote." And
Mm,
I didn't know what he was talking about at first. So then he sends me, "Oh, here's the book review." And, I'd kind of forgotten about it because I'd written it 13 years earlier. And I've written a number of book reviews and academic pieces since then.
mhm.
So it wasn't something that really interested me.
So
But
this is a book review from 13 years ago.
yes, yeah. And it's an academic book review. I mean, even that was questioned, though. Some of my critics questioned because it was in C2C Journal, which isn't, it's not a peer-reviewed academic journal, but it's certainly, they carry a lot of high-level academic work or thought.
Mhm.
And I have written in peer-reviewed journals. So I just, academics write in all sorts of venues. Now, I'm not a professor. I don't have a PhD. I went into law instead of, going the PhD
Mhm.
route, but I still write a lot of fairly academic stuff, and lawyers too write quite academic articles. So, yeah, I was a bit surprised, but, what I found out was this journalist who was really a blogger, affiliated with the Broadband Institute and the NDP here in Alberta,
Mhm.
decided he was going to come at me and tear my book review apart. He took out a couple of lines entirely out of context, but that's how it starts. That's how a
Really?
cancellation event starts. People pick up something, usually something rather innocuous. And it's not like you've had a whole history of doing this. This was the only thing I've ever written about Islam. Uh, so this was the only thing they had to go on. But that's how a
Hmm,
cancellation event starts.
interesting. So are you saying that part of the pattern of these, quote, "cancellation events" is that you're the target and they look
Mhm.
carefully at your background even 13 years before when you wrote kind of an obscure, I don't want to mean to put words in your mouth, Colin, but it's kind of an obscure review, and they look at it and they try to take something that maybe even be innocuous and pick it apart. Is
Mhm.
that right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Like you say, it was, and when you say obscure, I mean, I've spoken to the fellow in Premier Kenny's office who was tasked with originally reading this when the blogger and I think the National Council of Canadian Muslims went, complained to the Premier's office, and he told me that his response was, "Well, I don't understand most of it." Because it is a fairly obscure topic on, what is Orientalism. And I had studied medieval Islam at Harvard,
Mhm,
medieval Islamic philosophy. So
mhm,
I had, a background. Very few people have studied it. I mean, when I took a course on Al-Farabi, there were three of us registered in the class. It's not something that a lot of people look at, especially in the West. But
mhm,
they decided to go with this. I don't think today any of them could actually explain to you what it was about,
mhm.
but they certainly took out basically two parts of it, one sentence and then the intro, and decided to make a big fuss over that.
So would it be fair to say that your article then or review was obscure academic, but was done with the good intentions. It wasn't done out of malice or anything like that, but it was taken and twisted as somehow that you were anti-Islamic. Is that a
Mhm.
fair comment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, when I wrote it, um, no, I'd studied Islam, especially
Mhm.
medieval Islam, because when I was at Harvard, especially, and then I did 2 years at Boston College before moving to Europe, I was very interested in medieval political philosophy and as a precursor to the early moderns like Machiavelli and Bacon and Hobbes and Locke.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So, I at Harvard, I studied the medieval Islamic side. Boston College, I did a lot of medieval Christian. I mean, names
Mhm.
like Peter O'Reilly, Occam, Scotus, that almost nobody will know who they are. So,
We remember Occam, though, don't we?
well, yes, Occam has a razor, but it was no, there was never any malice intended against the
Mhm.
religion. Um, but you have to when you're thinking about a religion and how it relates to politics, you have to look at the religion for how it impacts the political realm. And most religions have specific ways of impacting the political realm. Buddhism has a very sort of pacifistic approach, though it has had an imperial side to it. It's, supported imperial Japan.
Mhm.
Hinduism can be used in a nationalist approach, but it's also tends to be quite diffused. Whereas the three monotheistic religions, all in some sense even related back to Zoroastrianism, tend to have a more immediate impact on the political realm. But of course, because they have significant differences amongst the three, you have to pay attention to those
Mhm.
differences. So I was trying to explicate what the the history and the political form that's appropriate to Islam is. And I agreed with the author somewhat, disagreed with the author. Of course, the author is a well-known professor of contemporary Middle East history. And but no, I was not trying to be hostile to anybody. I just wanted to understand.
Of course. So within this context, though, it was used against you, it was weaponized, this so-called review, and it was used to cancel you. So what happened next?
Well, I was the premier's office wanted me to meet with the National Council of Canadian Muslims. I had 2 Zoom meetings with them. There was a push for me to do a statement. Now, the statement and the apology, has certainly become par for the course for the target. There's always supposed to apologize. I didn't apologize, but and the NCCM didn't really like that so much that I didn't
Mhm.
apologize outright. But they wanted me to have future meetings with the Muslim community. I said sure, and it kind of went away in terms of my working with the NCCM because I didn't hear from them for a few months.
Okay, and I should just clarify, this is an association of different representatives of different Muslim groups? Is
Not
that right?
really, no. They're an advocacy group that form
Okay. An
they
advocacy
advocate on a
group?
certain view of Islam. They don't represent other groups, though they will sometimes sort of try to act as an umbrella group, but they're not.
Mhm.
And of course, that's one thing I've learned since then, that they don't represent all Muslims,
Mhm.
because eventually many Muslims did come to my defense, but that was after I'd been terminated, so it was too late. Uh, but yeah, I went on for a couple of months. I was getting into the job. I was discovering a lot of issues, a lot of problems at the Alberta Human Rights Commission that I think uh, some of them will probably come out more, should come out more. Some of them involving sexual assault or harassment of
Which
employees
we
at the
can't
commission.
talk about on this program.
No, I know. I'm not going to get into that. No, but it was I discovered these things, and I was working on those. Plus, I was still meeting with a number of people from the Muslim community.
Mhm.
I'd met with Minister Yassin, Mohammed Yassin. I'd met with a couple of the Muslim commissioners, and I was trying to figure out how to approach this, how to deal with this, how to react. And
Mhm.
I mean, one of the things that came up was certainly um, whether there would be sort of an innate hostility towards me from certain people in the Muslim community. So I had to kind of maneuver through that. But I got into the job and it was going along for 2 months.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So how did it come to an end?
Well, um, I had because some of these bloggers who, are affiliated with the NDP, quite on the left, and there weren't many. There was very few people who actually originally paid attention to the revelations about this book review. It was a very small number of people. But the NCCM decided that I hadn't done enough to accommodate them to meet with the Muslim community. They were also unhappy that I had filed some notices of defamation against these bloggers, which is required under the Defamation Act. If you have any chance down the road, want to have a chance of going ahead with a statement of claim, you have to serve these notices of defamation to journalists or bloggers. So I did that. My lawyer did that. Didn't really do anything with it. It didn't make it public. But the NCCM decided they weren't happy that I had done that, and they felt I wasn't accommodating the Muslim community enough. So they wrote a letter, had about some groups that signed on to it. Some of them are actually overlapped. They're not independent groups, but um, that was sent to the minister, or at least to his staff, to his office, and a few more things happened. But ultimately, I was asked to resign by the minister, though. That actually was the day after they put it out into the media, telling the media that they'd asked me to resign, and they hadn't yet. They actually sent me the letter the next day. So it came out in the media, that I was asked to resign, though that hadn't happened formally until the next day. And,
So this is really quite a story because here you are as a prominent lawyer, you're an academic, you have bring a lot of insight into a variety of issues. You're working with the Alberta Human Rights Commission. You're appointed as its head, and within a matter of what was it, 2, 3 months, you're gone.
yeah,
You're
2 months.
canceled.
Yeah.
And the numbers of people involved appear to be fairly modest or small,
Hmm.
and for whatever reason, people folded in and said, "Colin's gotta go."
Yeah.
So what was that like, Colin? What was your reaction to being canceled in that job?
Well, because of the cancellation doesn't tend to happen immediately. It goes slowly. It takes some time usually.
Mhm,
So you're going through this sort of limbo of being, are they going to get me finally or are they not? And it's very stressful. And of course, when you're the head of the Human Rights Commission, also because part of that is I would be writing decisions. I have to appear neutral in many
mhm.
ways, like a judge. So you can't give a significant defense of something you've done. You have to kind of just sit there and take this and try to calm everybody down. And plus, you're trying to make a bunch of politicians happy. And also the NDP, Rachel Notley's NDP, were attacking me regularly.
Mhm.
So, you've got those dynamics going on. So when I
Wow.
was finally fired by cabinet, they removed me from the position on September 15th, 2022. I was actually extremely relieved. But then, you start to realize your reputation's been hit, your career
Mhm,
is, badly damaged. You don't have income.
mhm.
So you start depression tends to take over.
Uh,
And you certainly get suicidal thoughts and all these sorts of things because your
wow.
entire career has just been wiped out by this small group of people uh who are not making any effort to understand what you did, why you did it.
Mhm,
And I looked at this as, well, this is part of what academics do. And even the
mhm.
author of the book sent me a statement in November of 2022, expressing his shock that I had been fired. He said, this review is no different from any other review of my book. This is
Mhm,
what academics do. How can you fire somebody for doing this?
mhm.
This is absurd. Um, but
Boy, what a difficult situation because you're held in limbo. The process is, in fact, very painful and
mhm,
uncertain. Your career comes to an end, and clearly, they didn't bring good faith to this, discussion. It was to, well, cancel you, to destroy you, and you've paid a huge price in terms of the impacts on your reputation and your career. I think the thing that I realize that is so amazing about your story, though, Colin, is despite that tragedy and frankly injustice, you decided to stand up and fight back. So, can you tell us more about your lawsuits that are in play right now in terms of what you can talk
Sure.
about
Yeah.
publicly?
Well, I filed a lawsuit for wrongful dismissal against the Alberta government. I think we filed that the day before Danielle Smith was elected leader. Um, and oddly enough, her comms person reached out to me that day and asked what it was about. And he admitted that I had been badly treated by the Kenney government. But we got it in under the wire. Jason Kenney was still premier, so we got it in before Danielle Smith became premier. Um, but unfortunately, we've gone through the process. We've done, produce your affidavit of records, go through questioning, we went to mediation,
Mhm.
and we still have no resolution. So it's a lawsuit that's still ongoing,
Okay.
and we're looking to set trial dates now. And I also
And
have just recently begun a defamation lawsuit. We waited on that. I wanted to see if we could get the other one finished. We haven't, but eventually, there's time limitation, so you have to start. So I've filed the defamation lawsuit. We just recently served it on the defendants. Um, we have one more statement of defense to receive, and then we'll start moving on with that. But the great thing about that is I have received financial support, but not from Canada anywhere, but from the United States. The Lawfare Project, which mostly works to protect members of the Jewish community who have been targeted for cancellation or who are under attack. But they came to my aid, and they've financed a large chunk of the defamation lawsuit.
isn't that
So
remarkable? So, you're saying there's a group in the United States is actually, from a donor perspective, out of their own generosity, helping to finance these lawsuits because they see it as so outrageous.
yeah, exactly. Now their
Isn't
CEO is
that
actually
remarkable?
A Canadian lawyer. She's from Montreal, but yeah,
Okay,
that's what they do.
remarkable. You have, been through this process. I think one of the things that you've remarked to me, and I found this rather disappointing, is that your support to you personally has been very mixed. There's
Mhm.
been many that did not give you any support whatsoever, and others that have. Can you tell us more about your, revelation that you got little support from many?
Well, the legal community has not been particularly supportive, apart from a few friends I have who are lawyers.
Mm.
But I don't have a full-time job. I'm not working with any law firm right now. Nobody has shown any interest in taking me on. Um, and I'd have to say my professional regulator has not been supportive. Um, now,
So, just to clarify, so you're saying that a law firm, given, your esteemed background, has not frankly approached you and offered you a job. Why is that?
I
I would
think
have thought
there's
that given your background, you'd be a very strong candidate that would bring that unique insight in terms of, well, the world of human rights and all kinds of other related topics.
Well, I think there's just a reticence to get involved in this, to address these issues. Um, and now what you said, of course, was at a more of an organizational level. Like I said, there were some individuals who certainly supported me. I mean, nobody came out and really said anything in my favor. But what I found was the first groups who started supporting me were American, not Canadian. Canada just did not
American?
have, yeah, they were the Middle East Forum. It's run by Daniel Pipes, whose father was Richard Pipes, a well-known Sovietologist.
Mhm.
They reached out to me. The Clarity Coalition, which was a group of Muslims and Reform Muslims, former Muslims, that's run by Zudi Jasser, who's from Phoenix, a doctor,
Mhm.
and Yasmin Mohammed, who's a ex-Muslim. And Zudi is still Muslim. And of course, they push back against this sort of cancellation of people for discussing Islam. Law and Liberty Journal out of the US, the American Mind, published some of the first things that I wrote about this. I found that these American organizations were on the ground and ready to go and willing to support me, like the Lawfare Project would be. I've started to see more in Canada now, and I've actually helped form some of them. So Canada wasn't there, but there has been quite a bit of change from 2022 to 2025 now.
Okay. So can you tell us more about those groups that are actively working with you to support you?
Okay, well, Clarity Coalition, as I mentioned, from the US, has moved now, set up a committee in Canada. I'm co-chair of that with Yasmin Mohammed. And that's actually grown quite a bit. We've joined the Alliance of Canadians Combating Anti-Semitism. It's called ELCA. That's an umbrella group headed by Mark Sandler, who's a criminal lawyer out of Toronto. Others like Muslims Facing Tomorrow have come out and
Mhm.
supported me. They've put out a statement. Actually, the National Association of Scholars, that's in the US, it has a Canadian chapter. They've also put out a statement supporting me.
Okay.
Um, so I'm finding that there is these groups are growing in Canada. What I would say though is a lot of that too has been triggered by October 7th. What
Mhm.
happened in Israel, because there's now a greater sense, I think, of an urgency to this.
Mhm.
There were certainly people like Raheel Raza, who's well known to many in Canada from Toronto, and her husband Sohail, who have been working in this area for a long time to combat Islamist extremism.
Mhm.
So it's getting there. It's starting to build.
Very good.
But I'm working with a lot of these groups just to help advance this and to fight back. There's also the Free Speech Union that just set up in Canada based
Yes.
upon the UK model with Lisa
Mhm.
Bildy. And I've also joined the board of the Friends of Richard Bilkstow, of course, who was the teacher who committed suicide after being bullied at a DEI anti-racism
And
presentation.
can we just, clarify that the story in brief about, Richard, Bilsko is a very moving one of the principal in Toronto, and, we have a picture of him, and it's truly a tragedy where within the context of a very dedicated teacher and principal in the Toronto
Hmm.
School Board, there was a series of anti-racism training, workshops where at some point in the training, he was actually kind of, targeted within it as saying that, you don't get, tolerance or, racism within the Toronto, school context, and anyways, it's quite a story, and he tragically later committed suicide, so you're part of an effort to, frankly, honor his legacy, is that right?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I have my first meeting with them next week, I believe it is, and as a director on their board, and they give out money, scholarships for people, especially in the teaching profession, who are working for free speech, in favor of free speech and academic freedom.
Very good.
So that's yeah, so that's what they do. They try to
Mhm.
remember him for the person he was and for what he did.
Very good. And I think this is part of the point of our discussion today. And I want to thank you very much, Colin, for sharing more about your story. And you've alluded to the impacts on you as a person. I mean, this has been really hard on you, Colin May. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, sure. I mean, shortly after it happened, my partner and I had some physical illnesses. They both have long-term consequences now.
Mhm.
Our home, we lost our home. We couldn't afford to live in it anymore. And my partner has suffered some job loss. I obviously have not yet returned to full-time work.
Mhm.
So it, yeah, it's ongoing, and there is this
Mhm.
very personal sense of betrayal. The NDP, Alberta's NDP came out and attacked me, especially Irfan Sabir. Although many of the caucus retweeted what he was saying about me. And my partner had actually worked for Rachel Notley for 4 years. He
Hmm.
worked for her as her and as I think her coordinator for touring and scheduling it was in southern Alberta. So I knew her well. She'd been in our home.
Mhm.
Irfan Sabir had been in my home. All these people had been in my home. And you actually get some of the NDPs when this started off, when the NDP started piling on. Other members of the NDP, like Martin Quaid Boyd, came to my defense and contacted us and said, they don't understand. This is not you. They
Uh-huh.
know they should know better. So, and then I, of course, being more affiliated with UCP, I've known a lot of them for a while. They just kind of dropped me. They weren't defending me. Um, so, you lose those connections.
Uh-huh.
But as I say, I've gained a whole new group of people, a new network through the groups that I'm working with out of the US, and now the ones that are building here in Canada. So, you try to move on. But as I said, there's still certainly very much a financial strain to all this. And then, of course, the
Mhm.
lawsuits on top of that are stressful. I mean, and having two of them on the go is double the stress. So it's not a fun thing to go through. No.
Well, what a remarkable story. I think then within this context, it's really something, Colin, to your credit, that you have tried to take a difficult, tragic story and tried to create something constructive and positive out of it. And so I want to talk to you now a little bit more about that as we kind of, well, put on our larger analytical caps and look at this and say, what is cancellation culture about? What's driving this and the phenomenon? And you've actually written some very interesting articles. I know that you've written them for both Frontier Center, but also at the C2C Journal. Um, so, can you help us understand a little bit more about the basics? So, first of all, where does this phenomenon of cancel culture come out of it? Is it kind of a political correctness or what some refer to as wokeism? Help us understand the basics of where this comes from.
Sure, sure. I think cancel culture is a strategy often used by people who look to wokeism as the theory to back it up. Um, but I've looked at it on some various levels. I've looked at using some work of Luke Sheehan, who's a professor out of Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. He's looked at the divided into the three parties involved in a cancellation event. And the motivations, especially for the cancelers, is never really, it's well never it to help the people who are being apparently harmed. It is basically to virtue signal to their own in-group and show
Oh,
their own importance within their own in-group.
hmm.
Then the target, as I've said, usually ends up trying to work their way out of it, and I've compared that to false confessions in the criminal law context. But you also have this third part. The third party is the institutional players who
Ugh.
actually allow the cancellation to occur because what cancellation normally involves is deplatforming from speaking, or you're terminated from your employment. And so another party actually has to do that. They have to acquiesce to these demands by the cancelers. So that third party is quite important. And I've written about that in the context of institutional betrayal theory, and that to show how institutions will betray the target. Um, and In terms of the woke side, though, there is very much in cancel culture the element of what we're calling woke now. Um,
And what do
and
you mean by woke? How would you define that,
Well,
Colin?
woke, I'll say quickly, like Eric Kaufman has called, professor at University of Buckingham in the UK, has called
Mhm,
woke basically sacralization of racial, sexual, gender identities.
mhm.
So you make these identities. It's identity politics in many respects.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's putting the notion of being a victim and making that almost the paramount value. It's almost like a different secular religion. Is that a fair comment?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think what's one of the things that's interesting about it is people who are in the sort of woke intellectual world, if you will, worldview,
Mhm,
um, they tend to see the world as oppressor and oppressed. So there's oppressors, there's the oppressed,
mhm. All through
and
power, like a power lens. That's
right.
what they teach.
It's
Yes.
yeah, it's very much about power. It's about narratives about power, discourses of power. It comes out of people like Michel Foucault, the French
Mhm,
thinker. It comes of neo-feminism and gender studies. Judith Butler's involved with that. It came out of critical theory,
mm,
including Herbert Marcuse. though many critical theorists are not fans of the woke approach. Um,
Oh, sure.
because one of the things that woke does is it actually now has sort of permeated our institutional structure so that it has become the oppressor. It's the one who
Mm,
turns on people,
wow.
and in a very authoritarian way.
Yeah.
So I think
Well,
that's
what I find so absurd about this is that within this kind of secular religion of wokeism, political correctness, where the victim is almost like the idol, you look through everything through powers, and in doing so, you dehumanize your fellow human being. Colin May, among so many others, are human beings,
Mhm.
and they deserve to be treated with a great deal of tolerance and respect. And just because we disagree on something doesn't mean that you should be dehumanized. Isn't that the paradox of all this nonsense?
Oh, very much so. I mean, one of the things that many of these intellectual movements that sort of are that have come together to constitute woke, they have tended to be against what they call essentialism. Now, essentialism is, you look at a bunch of particular things and you abstract from that, or you look for the universal within it. It's the way traditionally philosophy operated. Modern
Mhm.
philosophy started to turn against that. Yet, as you say, they engage in a sort of extreme kind of essentialism. They reduce the target to just a few statements taken out of context and build that into the entirety of that person, but they dehumanize them. They really treat them
Horrible.
as no longer viable as a person, and their efforts are aimed at destroying that person. They become because you're made, and there's some theories about this from Robert Nesbitt and Harold Garfinkel, even Rene Girard's stuff on the scapegoats, that the target is turned into um their what they've done wrong. That's all they are, is what they had been accused of.
Mhm.
And then of course they no longer become human. They are completely wiped out.
Horrible.
Yeah,
Well,
there's no
Colin, this
redemption.
reminds me this reminds me of, in a previous life, I had to do a lot of analysis and studies of totalitarian regimes, including the Soviet Union. I had the misfortune of having to read so many of Stalin's original papers,
Mhm.
and it reminds me of his way of thinking that the ends justified the means, and that there were literally millions that died at the altar of an ideology, the revolution of communism, and that was justified because this would somehow prove that they were on the right course and that there were others that were not. But paradoxically, this somehow enabled the revolution to proceed and to create a new utopia.
Mhm.
Is there something similar going on here?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that the studies show about the motivation for cancelers is that there's a self-efficacy element to it.
A
Um,
self efficacy
yes,
element.
they're cancelers, and like in my case, the people who criticized me did not know the topic nearly as well as I did, but they wanted to they wanted to instruct me. As one study called it, referred to it's educating the ignorant other, because they want to show these people, they want to show their own in group that they're knowledgeable about these topics, even though they
Oh,
aren't.
and better
Right.
and more
But
worthy.
as you say, it gives them this sense that they're on the right path if they can destroy somebody else and show that they are somehow improperly educated.
Mhm.
Like, the
Mhm.
idea of re-education, that they need to re-educate people. But of
Horrific.
course, they never do. They just wipe them out. They just destroy them. The re-education doesn't ever happen, really. It's just you wipe the person
Mhm.
out.
Well, so
Yeah.
fodder within the war of ideology and senseless
Yeah.
orthodoxy. Yeah, I mean, it just goes on and on. So, within this context, you've given a lot of thought to, well, there's almost like kind of a, would you say, a network that feeds on cancel culture, like kind of a set of groups that just they want to cancel people. It's part of how they operate, as you've alluded to. Can you tell us more about this larger network and principle?
Well, I'd say the larger network, as I said, it has it traditionally with cancel culture, it has been sort of at this level, social level. It's not, you don't have governments doing it to people so much, or um, courts or things like that. It's directed mostly by they're mostly on the left. Woke is essentially a left sort of idea, though now
Mhm. Mhm.
there's a term woke right coming out, which is another whole issue to get into, I guess. But it's these groups are very much they're activist groups. As I say, they're inspired by ideologies that come
Mhm.
out of neo-feminism, postmodernism, critical
Mhm.
theory, and to me, I think they're dumbed down versions of these thinkers. They're now some of the thinkers are very much into this sort of thing. They're perfectly willing to throw away the truth because, of course, there is no truth anymore for these groups. These people don't. There's no truth. There's just their activism, their narrative, um,
Okay.
and
So
so
there's these activist groups though, but I think for most of us as Canadians, we're kind of our heads are spinning and a little bit confused by all these fancy terminologies around, well, that relate to philosophy and political theories. Like, where is the common sense here for people to understand this is just not the way you treat people? And it puts aside, I think, foundational values to our society, like freedom of speech or the desire to look for truth. I mean, we need healthy debate more than ever
Mhm.
in this society, Colin, don't we? I mean, this is a threat to those foundational values that will make or break our country, won't they?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that was the thing that concerned me when I saw there was nothing in Canada to really push back on these things. Because like you say, it undermines freedom of speech. It undermines academic freedom. It undermines rule of law. It undermines procedural fairness. All these
Exactly.
things that we are supposed to rely on are being wiped out by this ideology. And it's concerning because, yeah, countries don't survive. And unfortunately, we had a prime minister who said we were the first post national nation, which is very much the rhetoric of this ideology. That there
Mm.
is no
Mhm.
center to anything. There's no way of it. We can't define any Canadian identity. I mean, Canadians for years have been arguing about what an identity is, and we have some
Mhm.
major different components to it. But if you can't talk about those things, if you can't come to some agreement about the political, the judicial, the civil discourse that we're supposed to have, and what the principles are, then you're finished. You're just gonna, So what will happen eventually is you'll end up with whoever's the most powerful, who can, you know, move the most people, the biggest mass will win, and that can
Mm.
go very badly in another direction. you know,
Wow. So if I'm understanding you correctly then, Colin, instead of walking shoulder to shoulder and supporting each other as we build our country, we go shoulder to shoulder instead of assuming we're trying to, well, have a healthy debate so we can search for the truth and innovate and make our economy better and each other better. That's not where they're coming from. They're not coming shoulder to shoulder. They're coming at us right on our faces, head to head, with the idea that you are wrong and you need to be destroyed.
well, yes, but they're not even really saying that you're wrong. It's just that there is no right or wrong. So you are just an an obstacle in the way to be eviscerated. It's not They don't really care if it's right or wrong. You're just an obstacle in the way to be eviscerated. And I think that is, you know, the scary element of the sort of relativism that they practice. That it doesn't matter. You couldn't convince them that there's a right or wrong. So it's really
Wow.
just about the tribalism, just about fighting.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, in light of that kind of context, this is a kind of a five alarm threat, a concern to the future, frankly, of our nation, civilization, a lot of people would call it
Mhm.
enlightenment. And that's no overstatement, is it, Colin?
No, no, it's absolutely not. I think this is very much, um, where we're arriving at. And as I said, the thinkers who have sort of are often drawn on to justify
Hmm.
this would themselves probably be very concerned
Yeah, they'd be
ultimately.
horrified. Yeah,
Yeah, I
right.
mean, wouldn't
Mhm.
have thought this is the way we should be going.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's truly very concerning. It's disturbing. So in this context, though, in light of this concern, we would normally turn to, well, I want to get through them, some of these groups. Let's start off with the politicians. We would assume that the elected officials, and I used to be one,
mhm,
would be on the forefront of protecting people like Colin May and saying, back off, people. We need to have a conversation and work this out, but we're not going to cancel anybody. He's got a legitimate point of view. And by the way, this is, well, I mean, I could go on and on here, but I won't. But where are the elected officials? Why do they go along with this? It's almost like they don't have any. What's the incentive for them to protect Canadians from the hordes of people who just want to cancel people willy nilly? Help us understand this from an analytical point of view and help us understand what is the incentive here? Or is
well,
it because they want these guys grouped? They want their votes? They want
I
the
think
votes?
I think it is they want their vote, but one of the things that happens with cancel culture is it happens very much within a certain class in society. It's almost
Mm,
always the professional managerial class or
interesting.
they are usually the cancelers and the canceled. Now, somebody like Musa Al-Garbi, who's written a book about this, about the social theory behind cancel culture, has argued that
Yeah.
this is very much an intraclass situation.
Hmm.
It's not about the working class is not involved, the middle class isn't involved, and the very wealthy often aren't involved. So it becomes a kind of dynamic within these groups, especially when there's pressure. There's a lot of competition for position
Okay.
in that. Musa Al-Garbi refers to it as symbolic capitalism. They're trading on symbols, so they need to show
Okay.
that they are with the right
Ah.
symbols.
Okay.
And
So
I
this
think
is a very important insight. So it's not Main Street that's doing the canceling. It's the good and the great among the halls of academia and professional classes who
yes,
have to rely on the prestige and their cred, pardon me, depends on them following this new religion. Is that right?
yes, yeah, and I think oddly enough, now politicians are more difficult to cancel than I was because I wasn't a politician. Because they're used to spinning things and they have teams around them
Mhm.
that do this. And of course, in my situation, politicians, when it got too hot, they finally just got rid of me. But it is very much, yeah, it is something we have to see. It's very much within this particular class. Um, and of course, it has also, if you're less established as a lawyer or something
Yeah.
or a doctor, it can be easy to cancel somebody. I mean, I was sort of mid-range as a lawyer. I'd been a
Mhm.
lawyer for
Mhm.
12 years when I got the job as chief. So, but yeah, you have to look, I think, that very much at that the interior dynamics of that class, which oddly in a
Mhm.
way isn't a class even. It's not like there's not even the capitalists, it's not a Marxist capitalist analysis. It's sort of this class that, James Burnham wrote about in the
Wow.
1940s that has come that's not it doesn't have the wealth. Like
Yeah.
J.K. Rowling can't be canceled. She's just too significant a person to
Yeah.
cancel.
Exactly.
Whereas people who are professionals who, have some money, but they're not overly rich. They have reputation is everything. I mean, the first day of law
Mhm.
school, what do they always tell the students? Your reputation is everything, which of course is somewhat concerning because, what about the truth? But anyhow, but
Okay, so this is very interesting though, because if I used a simplistic analogy, it's almost like this is like a schoolyard where in a particular part of the schoolyard, not the entire one, not all of society, but in a particular corner of the schoolyard, you got this bullying going on, this cancellation nonsense, and it is destroying people.
yeah,
It's
absolutely.
horrible.
Yeah. Did
So so in this case, the politicians may or may not defend us, namely the principals. They may go along with that crowd of bullies.
Mhm.
But institutions, surely they should be helping us, Colin, to defend us. I mean, surely the universities who pontificate about freedom of speech and freedom of inquiry, I mean, this is why they give us, as professors, tenure. Surely they should be all against this, are they?
No. No, I would say in that context, when I first started talking about this and gave a talk about it, Claudine Gay at Harvard was in trouble. She was canceled, you might say, but her cancellation actually came from the right. It was more Christopher Rufo and that group came at her from the right. Yet I talked to people I know at Harvard, some professors, and they said to me, "Well, Claudine Gay used to cancel professors left, right, and center at Harvard, so she did the same thing." So
Isn't that ironic?
it very
Yeah.
much fit into that dynamic of there's competition in this class for honors, and people will be cutthroat to take each other out and to
Wow.
demonstrate their own um, adherence to the dogma that's required.
Mhm. Okay,
Um,
so, but it doesn't remind you that it's kind of a dog eat dog world where not only do these people, some of them actually believe in this religion where they are the good and the great, but they also use it as a badge of honor
yeah.
to advance their careers. And so, I mean, you went to Harvard. I mean, are you surprised that Harvard now is being called out for all this anti-Semitism?
No, no, not at
That's
all.
been in the news, and that the Trump administration is finally calling them out on basic civil rights violations, that they aren't protecting the rights of Jewish
Mhm.
students, among others, and they shouldn't receive any kind of taxpayer funding. Isn't this kinda long overdue?
Yeah, because when I was at Harvard, I was there in the 90s. And of course, then it was political correctness. That was the big thing. And I saw it. I mean, I was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. But political correctness, and there are precedents as well in the 1960s, and even Musa al-Gharbi goes back to the 1920s to
Yes,
find
right.
some. But political correctness really kind of stayed in the university. And it was knocked down quite a bit by the courts because they would bring in
Mhm,
these speech codes and then people would challenge them in the courts in the US and then they'd
mhm,
always collapse. They'd always lose. So political correctness didn't invade our cultural landscape and our social
mhm.
landscape, and especially our institutional landscape, the
Right.
way cancel culture and wokeism have, because they've become so dominant in our institutions. Though, like I say, even at universities, they're more dominant with administration than the entirety of the faculty. Because there still are faculty members who are, a lot of faculty members don't like cancel culture. They're afraid of it. But administration has gone so woke. But you see that now. The institutions have really taken on a lot of this dogma. Now, some of them are pulling back, not surprisingly,
Mhm.
beginning with corporations because they have to, worry about the bottom line. But and some politicians, you can look at Pierre Poilievre. He sort of comes across as the anti-woke, if you will, candidate. But
Mhm.
you know, that's where I see, and this is something that I'm looking at more now, is where are we going next? What is it leading to? And it does seem to be now moving more into an institutional approach that shuts people down. You don't have cancelers so much on the social level or amongst these organizations. Institutions themselves will attack people for and
Okay.
cancel them.
So this kinda makes sense. So your theory would be that Colin, well, I've seen the polls as well in Canada, and there's a lot of different data points on this. About 80%, 75% of Canadians don't buy into this woke nonsense,
Mhm.
this kind of cultural socialism, as others call it, where it's all about diversity, equity, inclusion, as much as they want a tolerant, caring society. They don't buy into this nonsense. So you're left with a minority group that is pushing us through the institutions. And it kind of makes sense because if you believe what you're saying, that a lot of these people come out of a kind of a professional background, it's the teachers, professors, the
Mhm.
lawyers, others that are kind of embedded in these institutions, and they're kind of pushing it on the rest of society. Is that kind of what you're getting at here, Colin?
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is where we're seeing a change now. certain elements of cancel culture are going by the wayside, but we're moving into what I'm calling the incarceration culture. And that's just my
What?
working title.
The incarceration culture?
Well, I think you're
That
seeing
doesn't sound good.
no, and this is one of the things that's interesting about this. You're seeing this in uh, some of the reactions of professional regulators. The Amy Ham case, for instance, here in Canada.
What is
Um,
that case?
Amy Ham, she was an RN who was supporting J.K. Rowling,
Mhm.
and saying that, sexual
Yeah.
differences matter.
She had the audacity as a nurse to put up a billboard that says, "I think I'm with J.K.
Yeah,
Rowling that there's only, what is it, 2 genders?"
yeah, and she's gender critical. And there's
And she was prosecuted by her professional association, the BC
yeah.
College of Nurses,
Well,
kicked
she
her out.
made
Is
she
that it?
made the mistake, and I know professional regulators, and as soon as we do this, if we say, "Well, I am a nurse, speaking as a nurse, speaking as a lawyer," they will get
Mm.
upset. They then take
Okay.
jurisdiction and they start coming at you. Now some of them are, I sat on the board of the College of Physicians and Surgeons. I think the CEO was very good. And I mentioned the issue we had for my sister. The CEO of her regulator, once she realized what had happened, was really good at replying to this and trying to
Mhm.
stop it.
Mhm.
But um, what we're seeing in the UK especially is worrying because we're seeing a lot of people being jailed, like Lucy Connolly for tweets. Um, and
For
it's
so-called hate speech, right? To be
right. And
clear?
those are the things that are concerning me now are the online
Yeah.
harms acts and things like that, where
Yeah.
government is actually initiating the cancellation in
Okay,
effect.
so let's just clarify here. So in Canada, we've got a number of pieces of legislation, like the so-called Online Harms Act, Bill C-63,
Hmm.
that died on the order paper with the last parliament. But the concern is that under the new Carney government, uh, what's your sense of all that coming back to the order paper where it's adopted as law, a law that basically enables the state to go after anybody under any pretext in terms of so-called hate and put you in jail. Is that right, Colin? Am I simplifying? I mean, you're the lawyer here.
Well, it's simplified in a way. I mean, everything lawyers can always make things sound, oh, you got to be more subtle about this or more subtle about
Mhm.
that. And there's protections here and there's protections there. Well, okay, yes. But I've read the decisions regarding Lucy Connolly in
Mhm.
the UK who was imprisoned, um, and how the prosecution used an act that really wasn't appropriate to prosecuting her, but it had the most stringent and the most long-term consequences for her.
Mhm.
So they used the most heinous act, if you want to say, to come after her. And this
Mhm.
is what we're seeing is these things like the Online Harms Act, I suspect will come back in some form.
Let's hope
Um,
not.
and well, we can hope not, but I wouldn't be surprised if in some way it does. No, it may not. Maybe there will be a
Mhm.
political determination
Yeah.
that this is not a good idea. But
But the future clearly is Europe, and Canada is not too far behind.
yeah,
And what's so outrageous about this is it's giving a bunch of bullies courtesy a gift from our governments who are supposed to protect our individual rights and freedoms. These same governments are giving these schoolyard bullies weapons to go after anybody that they just want to shut down and get rid of.
yeah,
It's
and well,
outrageous.
they're doing it for them. They're not even giving the weapons to the people who used to cancel on the social level. They're just doing it for them. They're prosecuting people. They're using the power of the state to prosecute people. And one of the things that I'm seeing that is changing here with this is if it was with cancel culture, it was the professional managerial class that was canceled and did the canceling. Now you're often seeing it's the middle and lower working classes who are they don't have the wealth to deal with this. And in the Lucy Connolly situation, she did what every target does. She pled guilty. And which,
Horrible.
given what she was facing, that I think that advice may have been correct. I'm not going to judge one way or another. But she ended up with 31 months in prison for a tweet that she took down a few hours later. And I've read the decisions. I mean, the decisions from a certain perspective make sense, but you have to sort of already have accepted the premises of the cancellation idea and the woke approach. If you don't, then you can say, well, they don't make sense. And so if you step out of that, but it's concerning to me because now we're seeing, as I called it, incarceration culture
Mhm.
with these changes, and they're targeting people like the working class who are often, when the issue of migration, of course, is a very touchy one in the UK right now. And the working class is often the class that first encounters what if there's negative effects from migration into a
Of
country,
course.
they're going to encounter it. And they often react with the
Mhm.
most harshness towards it. The wealthy don't that doesn't impact them very much. They just hire
Of
these
course.
people to work for them
Mhm.
at a lower wage.
But
So
to me, it is truly stunning that we have a class of people in our nation, so many in the professions, who believe they're the good and the great and have a right to not just suppress discussion and your opinion in the name of, well, correct thought. They have a right to basically destroy your life. And I think this is
Mhm.
disturbing as a country that values or should value every other Canadian. And I find this very concerning. So, in this context, what can we do as citizens, Colin, to turn the corner on this outrageous tragedy so that your situation is a tragedy? How do we prevent that from happening ever again?
Well, what I'm looking at is, okay, we've had the cancellation culture phase. We have what I say, I'm calling this incarceration culture, where you're actually having people being
Mhm,
targeted for fines or by professional regulators or by government,
mhm.
by prosecutors, and under what I call the prosecutorial democracy, not liberal democracy anymore, but prosecutorial
Yes.
democracy. So, what struck me in my own experience so far has been the only way to really push back against this is to form these organizations, whether they're think tanks, whether they're things like the Lawfare Project that funds defenses for people, whether they're advocates who push back to government and say, no, we don't want you to put in these bills because we think they impede free speech, and they don't help people, they don't protect anyone. So as I said, I've seen this change in Canada from 2022 when I was canceled to now, of more of these organizations coming online. But I think one of the things we have to understand is that we need many of them. Like the Free Speech Union, as I said, in Canada has just started up. They've got their first case. I mean, I've been talking to them a bit about my case. Um, I think we need also the infrastructure, and we need the money, because people are losing their
Mhm.
incomes, they're losing homes, they're losing their livelihoods, and then they're having to pay legal fees, plus now they're being targeted for criminal prosecution. All of these things, we need the organizations, I think, at sort of the civil society level to push back. We need civil society to push back against the cancelers who are on the social level more, but also against the institutions that think they can do this. Now, a lot of people look at Donald Trump and saying he's doing it. Yeah, he might be doing a good job some ways, bad jobs. There's a lot of mixed feelings about that. I mean, there was certainly a sense that when he was elected, that was the end of woke. Um, we'll see.
But let's be clear, in Canada, as a different country, woke is highly embedded
Mhm,
in our institutions.
yeah.
We know from report after report that in universities in the humanities, uh, particularly, to some degree, the social sciences, they are dominated by Marxist faculty members. I mean, this is just that's how they self-describe. I'm not making this up. So
Mhm.
this begs the question, why are we supporting through the taxpayer so many of these universities who are indoctrination centers? They're not places of education anymore. They have lost their way. Isn't this what we need to call out and basically either renew or get rid of these institutions?
I think so, yeah. I mean, one of I mean, it seems, universities, a lot of universities aren't really, they just want to focus on research. So medicine and science, and that,
Yeah,
they don't even want to do the
well
arts,
done.
but you're not going to be a university if you don't have a faculty of arts, really. I don't think you
Indeed.
are. but you need to change those things up. Certainly, and I think in Canada, you know, from my experience with academics in the U.S. and Canada, in the U.S., universities do have big endowments. They've got lots of money of their own. Now they get a lot of government money, but the private universities are very wealthy on their own, but they have been influenced by donors who are not happy
Right.
with what they're doing.
But let's be
But
clear. In Canada, most of our public universities are funded top to bottom by the taxpayer. And
yes,
federal programs, when it comes to research chairs, their first and foremost criteria set is not about research. It's about, do you fit their ideological criteria of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I could go through
yeah,
it in great detail. This is totally, I believe, in my humble opinion, totally antithetical to what a university is about. And yet that's
yeah.
exactly what they're doing. And doesn't this mean that Canadians need to wake up to this? Like, why would you give a donation in all the greatest respect to a university? I don't understand it.
Well, there's the tradition. It's you went there and
I
you've
guess.
been successful and all these sorts of things at your alma mater and all that. But, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. In many ways, Canadian universities, if you have a government directed initiative to force universities or to incline them or gently push them, however you want to do it, to get rid of some of this DEI, approach. And I mean, and there's certain elements of DEI or what used to be, DEI that are getting wiped out that shouldn't be. I mean, certainly, having offices that help, say, immigrant students, to
Sure.
move through the system and then get a
Yeah.
job, that's fine. I mean, that makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
People who have traditionally not been in the university system, helping them get in, but giving, the DEI approach is far beyond that. But if you had governments, I think, that were saying to these universities, no, we're not going to give you the money, they'd be in massive trouble because Canadian universities generally are funded more by the public. So if you had a government stepping in and saying, look, we're we're not going to take away your academic freedom. You can still study what you want, but let's work a little bit on the viewpoint diversity. Let's get a little more in there from
Well,
different
the
sections.
last time I checked, your country can't move forward unless you emphasize merit, and respect for each other as people. So within this context, I guess my final question will be, Colin, does it make sense then for Canadians to speak up about this? Is that not a key point of action that they need to consider in order for us to move forward here?
Absolutely. I think Canadians definitely need to speak up. Um, but I think it does take sort of these new organizations, these civil society organizations, and alternative media in a way too, because the mainstream media just doesn't tend to focus on this. So I think it will take some organizing on Canadians' part and some speaking up. Um, and they have to start to become aware of how these issues are impacting them. And as I say, if we move into something like an online harms act, that will start to impact people uh, who were outside of the sort of culture orbit. So I think that, yeah, we have to do something about it. Canadians need to take this seriously, and we haven't. I mean, we are behind. We're certainly behind the Americans. We're certainly behind the Europeans, and of course, the Americans do have, the First Amendment, so they've got some very robust protections for speech and expression. Um, Whereas other countries, maybe not so much. They're not
Mhm.
as constitutional. They're not as entrenched. But yeah, I think Canadians absolutely need to take this seriously. And I think a lot of the people who look at cancellation and wokeism as being ridiculous are from the working and middle classes. And they have, as I said, they have been targeted, but they are being targeted more. So they have to be, people need to be aware that they will be targeted. Um, and we need to speak up against it in Canada. We need to catch up with what,
Mhm.
a lot of Americans are already doing. Some of the Europeans are getting more, like you watch, there's podcasts coming out of the UK all over the place now, challenging Keir Starmer, challenging the wokeism there, raising the issue, especially the scandal that came up around the grooming gangs there. Um, Canadians really haven't seen that so much, and they'll just kind of let things go. They just will talk about, the typical issues we talk about, but it's there, and we have to be aware of it. And then, if you're sending your kids off to university and they're being taught across an array of classes, that there's oppressors and there's oppressed, all that sort of thing. It is this really what you want your kids to learn? Is this really what is true? I mean, I don't think it is true. I don't think that's how the world works. Uh, but that's where we're at.
All right. Well, Colin May, your story is very instructive, and it's certainly a warning to every Canadian that this issue not only matters, but we can speak up and help make a difference. So I want to thank you for joining us today for this far-reaching conversation about a topic that matters to Canadians. And I want to thank you for your courage and for your commitment. And I wish you all the very best.
Thanks, David. It's been great chatting with you. Really enjoyed it. And if anybody wants to ever reach out to me and talk about cancel culture, as I said, I've talked quite a bit about it, written quite a bit about it. So happy to discuss more, and happy to help people who are facing the cancellation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.